Over the past year and a half, the pandemic has created new hurdles for students in Boston who struggle with learning and mental health. But that was also a problem before the pandemic and one of the reasons behind a program introduced for male students in 2017. Recently, a new program was announced for girls in middle and high school, Working On Womanhood, or WOW. It's made possible by a partnership between the Boston Public Schools and the WOW program developer Youth Guidance, with support from the GreenLight Fund. To tell us about the effort are the Executive Director of Youth Guidance Boston, Shawn Brown, and the Fund's Senior Executive Director, Melissa Luna. I'd like to thank you both very much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you for
Thank you for
having
having us.
I'd like to start with Melissa because as we hinted in the intro here, this is not just about things we realized during the pandemic. The Greenlight Fund sort of scouts the landscape to see what these needs are. What did you see as acute needs for girls in middle and high school?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. And thank you for having us again. So I think for Greenlight Fund, one of the things we do is on an annual basis, look for these opportunities and better understand the landscape and the needs. And when it came to girls, and specifically we're looking at girls of color, we engaged in conversations with local leaders in the school district, as well as the criminal justice field and youth development. And we also looked at research available to better understand the needs. And so what we found were that there was issues around economic mobility for girls in our region, and specifically as they grow into adulthood. We also looked at the school to prison pipeline for girls of color, and specifically the reports that found that girls of color in BPS and Black girls and specifically were disciplined at higher rates than their white and male peers. And then third, we also looked at the connection between trauma and the historical criminalization of coping behaviors for girls. So like aggressiveness, truancy for girls, these are often criminalized. And so as we look to see how these pose barriers for girls as they advance, these were sort of the types of issues that we were looking at. We looked at the different studies that reference this. So in 2019, the Opportunity Insight study from Harvard University found that location matters when it comes to economic mobility. And they did a longitudinal study and found that where you grow up in your first 20 years really had an impact on future income. And for Suffolk County, what is interesting is that gender matters. So for girls from low income backgrounds, growing up here took away $3,000 in future income, while it added $1,000 for boys. And this is actually true across all socioeconomic backgrounds for girls. And so, so when we looked at economic mobility, that is a huge factor. When we looked at schools and how schools play a role in economic mobility, that was also one of the things that stood out for us. So in 2015, the Black Girls Matter report found that Black girls in Boston were disciplined 11 times as much as white girls, expelled 10 times as much as white girls, and suspended 12 times as much as white girls. And so the thing that we don't recognize is that girls of color in particular are likely to experience trauma, depression, and anxiety, and that these types of behaviors often are criminalized and not supported as they go through the school district. And so the connection between these, and in particular, when we looked at girls of color in Boston Public Schools and the high rates of depression and anxiety, we needed to do something to ensure that we were improving outcomes for girls of color in our city.
Shawn Brown, I know it's not exactly the same for boys, but Youth Guidance started the program here, becoming a man for many of the same reasons, and maybe for some of the similar underlying causes such as trauma. What did you see with boys that sort of informs you in this program for girls?
Yeah, it was first, Chris, thank you for having us. But it was similar. When you think about the young men, oftentimes they don't have a safe space, let alone a safe space. Young men just aren't, when you think about expressing emotions and dealing with mental health, it's taboo, for men when you think about the mantra of, the machismo of being a man and things of that nature. So, being able to provide, a safe space for young men to come into a circle and do ruthless self-examination and share their feelings, and then affirm those, have them understand that, it's okay to address your mental health. It's okay, for, young men to be vulnerable, show emotions, And BAM allowed, young men to have that safe space and be in touch with those emotions, providing them a space where, they can come with their peers and realize that, there's a lot more in common than, they think they have, especially when you're in a space and vulnerability is present. So BAM creates a space for young men where it's fun, safe, but challenging as well. And the challenging piece is dealing with those emotions. So, that's what we saw in our young men. And then, for that was having them internalize, all the core values and lessons that, they were learning in BAM, and then apply those to the classroom and apply them to their life. So really having them think about, the decisions that they were making, slow down their thought process. And in doing that with BAM, it blends three different modalities. There's clinical theory and practice, then there's rites of passage and a dynamic approach to youth engagement. And really the clinical piece is what, the young men weren't accustomed to, and then once, learned and realized the value, and started to see the difference and change in them and their peers. It made all the difference in the world.
I think a lot of us get it right away that releasing the emotions is therapeutic, but how do you get from that to where people are more focused on learning and maybe more directed towards some kind of opportunity?
Yeah, when you say opportunity, Chris, just in terms of opportunity for,
it could mean where you go to get higher education,
okay,
where you go to get a job with somebody,
awesome,
and you feel good about yourself as a developing human being.
Absolutely, and that's a great question, because there's a direct correlation, to that. Once our young men are in that spaces, they're connected to different opportunities, workforce development opportunities. So our young men in BAM are having an opportunity to work at high-level internships throughout the summer, as they're being connected to, Mass General Hospital, the Bank of America's, the Federal Reserve. These are all internships that, these young men are getting, because they're proving themselves now in the classroom, which allows them to have these opportunities. And it's all through, like I said, learning and internalize those 6 core values that we're teaching our young men. The 6 core values are integrity, accountability, self-determination, positive anger expression, respect for womanhood, and visionary goal settings. So that positive anger expression is really important, because a lot of our young men, what we like to do is affirm our kings for their anger, and let them know that anger is a normal expression. It's okay. How do you channel that? That energy? Do you channel it in a negative way, or do you channel it in a positive way? And when we talk about that, we talk about in the way of, are you channeling that energy in a savage way or in a warrior way? And the savage is destructive, and the warrior way is productive. And how do you make the best out of that situation? And our young men, see when they do that it leads to the opportunities that you're talking about, Chris. So they're exposed to different opportunities in the workforce. They're exposed to college tours. We do a huge national, before COVID, one of our hallmarks was our national HBCU tours, that we would take young kings to visit, HBCUs, up the East Coast. And, they came back from that, and young men started to say they see themselves in college now because of that experience. We actually, through the HSA assessment, holistic student assessment, we surveyed young men, and 96% of our young men said they see themselves going to college. And that's a direct correlation to, those opportunities. 96% of our young men said that they have healthy relationships with adults, and see themselves graduating from high school, which again is a direct correlation to those relationships, the core values and things of that nature.
Listen, yes, listen,
Oh,
I want to ask you. Yes, please go ahead.
I was going to add a couple of things that I think are even more basic than that, and I think fundamental to school and education, you have to show up every day. And one of the things that Shawn and his team does really well is they work with the boys that are on the verge of leaving school. And so when they come into the BAM program, when you holistically serve a young person, they start showing up to school. And so, one of the things that the BAM program has been able to do is, even throughout the pandemic, they have high attendance rates for their scholars that come through the program. And that is fundamental to ensuring that they're cared for and also on track for education. And it's the thing that I think that we often take for granted is important, that if that young person isn't in that seat every day, they cannot move forward in their education. And BAM, it's one of the critical things to BAM is that they not only care for that scholar, show them the opportunities, but they're ensuring that that scholar is showing up every day to school and on track for education and working with their teachers.
Well, what you're also talking about, Melissa, I think is the level of attention, the intensity of attention from a caring adult. What's that mean exactly?
Well, I mean, I think, so my background before working at GreenLight was in youth development. And so the importance of a young person having a caring adult in their life is transformative. And I think we take for granted for a lot of us as adults who have our parents who have been there for us, that you have a caring adult who care, that will follow you throughout your trajectory. And that isn't the case for all our young people. And, I think it's important for us to recognize that a young person needs all those types of support in the school day and out of school time. And one of the things that the youth guidance team does really well is, yes, they're going to make sure you're supported during school. They have these weekly sort of mentoring circles, but they're also going to check in with you outside of school. During the pandemic, Shawn and his team was integral for BPS and ensuring that their scholars had one-on-ones with their counselors to ensure that their basic needs are being met during the pandemic, and is important as we continue to move out of the pandemic. And well, we're still in it, but as we continue to navigate this, that a young person is really evolving and growing during the adolescence during this time, as we're trying to figure out and grow and evolve as a community to respond to the pandemic. And so research has shown the importance of having this caring adult, how it leads to better outcomes in education and career. And so I think for me, the investment into WOW to bring them here and ensure that the girls are also having the caring, supportive adults is important. And it remains to be, ensuring that we have equity in our city at this point.
Can I add to that, Chris?
Sure.
Because what Melissa, spoke about, we talk about with BAM and WOW that is the secret sauce. The secret sauce to BAM is WOW. WOW is the adults that we hire to be mentors to our young kings and queens. And it starts with hiring folks who have lived experience. These are folks who come with backgrounds in social work, clinical degrees and things of that nature, but also have that, what we call high cool efficiency. Being able to relate to our young people is important. When I just going back to, again, the data, most recent data for WOW, 96% of our young queens have said that, WOW has helped them make better decisions for themselves. And we contribute that directly to the relationship of the WOW counselors that they have. So, that is the secret sauce. When we think about the program, it starts with getting, adults who are a reflection of our young people and what we want them to be.
Well, thank you both very much for taking the time to describe the program, both the new one and what came before. That was Shawn Brown from Youth Guidance Boston and Melissa Luna from GreenLight Fund. We'll have more news in just a moment.